All right, greetings and hello. I have an excellent story of discovery for you today on the topic of LLM and AI technology. I'll be covering some history before we dive into the real story that I want to tell. And that story is how I went from one Claude Code CLI session in a throwaway VM to a multi-session dev UAT team running Salt-orchestrated test infrastructure to produce a fairly complex application. So this is going to be part one of a three-part series, and there's quite a bit to cover. So this segment, I'm going to start with some of the history, like I mentioned, my experiences with LLM technology thus far to kind of set the stage for what's coming up. Part two is where I'll actually dive into the slide deck, showing the first slide here now, that'll illustrate exactly kind of what I discovered about Claude Code and how it's a little bit different from some of the other tools that I've used out there so far. Part three, we're going to dive into the actual project that I produced, and you'll be able to see some of the work that the agents did, GitHub issues related to it, and things like that that will all make sense by the time we actually get there. All right, so without further ado, a little history, right? We're going to switch away from the slideshow and right here, ChatGPT, the chat interface on the web. This was one of my first interactions with an LLM, right? When I first saw it, I thought it was pretty cool. It's a better search engine, if you will. It's going to summarize what I'm looking for and, kind of generate that content. Also, sometimes create some wildly incorrect information, right? I did find it was able to help me troubleshoot some things faster, surface information, and just kind of explore ideas. So pretty neat, but it still felt like the search engine use case to me. There was no wow moment in here, right? And it's neat and helpful, but I didn't see anything in this kind of interface that was going to change the world. And so a couple months later, right, Copilot launched, and it brought AI pretty much directly into the IDE, right? Let me bring that up here. So you can see like you've got the chat session off to the side, but in a repo, this can actually, generate code, autocomplete, directly manipulate the project you're working on with the chat interface directly in the IDE. I did find this advancement quite helpful. You could do a little bit more with it, but it was still kind of just a code assistant, right? I wasn't going to be able to hand this thing a project plan and be like, go do. So I was still a little confused. I did love it from the perspective of a pair programmer that was quite knowledgeable and helping with the projects. So backing up here. So after running with the IDE for a couple of months, I started getting more and more curious and wondering what all the hype was about, right? I was hearing about Claude Code, I was hearing about Codex, about Cursor, plenty of other offerings out there in that line of offerings. So with that curiosity, I started doing some digging around, right? My Copilot subscription, when I had it at the time, you could choose from your models down here, Claude Code, you could choose Sonnet, you could choose Opus. So I figured I had the models. What difference could just buying on into Claude Code and using the Claude Code CLI actually make, right? Right about the time I was thinking about that, I had a conversation with a former colleague, specifically about Claude Code. And that conversation led me to go ahead and throw $20 out for that Anthropic Pro plan and just kind of evaluate what the fuss was all about, right? And I was wrong. There is a market difference, and we're going to be explaining some of that here. First thing I want to take you through here in this part one is going to be kind of the interface differences, right? That's the kind of the big aha moment I had whenever I was first onboarding with Claude. And so with LLMs, pretty much they've all, there's several interfaces to interact with the models, right? Sometimes you'll hear them called a harness, like the agent harness for the model. one of those interactive interfaces is the chat interface, right? We've got ChatGPT up here, Claude on the next tab. It's got the same kind of thing, the whole search engine style experience. It's a little neater now, right? You can create some diagrams, you can create images. There's all kinds of stuff that it can do now other than just, the web searches that you would think of in the past. I like starting with this now when I'm starting a new project to kind of help plan, to kind of really just get a vibe for where I'm going, if you will, to get a feel for it and set the README and the project plan markdowns in place before I pick up with the IDE or the CLI. So that's how I use the chat interface now. Second up, we've got the IDE interface that we were talking about, right? We had that up before. This is the GitHub one, Copilot. Claude Code is in here too, I believe. Is it going to load? Yeah, it's going to ask me for the subscription. I haven't signed in here yet. But it's got a very similar thing right here in the IDE. Back up here and not get distracted. So the IDE for both Claude and Copilot seemed very similar. Once I got exposed to the Claude Code version of the IDE plugin, I started noticing a lot of differences. It's more about kind of like keeping you outside the code and letting Claude do the work. Not as much of the autocomplete while you're doing the work kind of thing. But let me get back on topic to the CLIs, right? These were the thing that was like, wait, what? How does this work? So I dove in and after, I guess, about a day and a half with the IDE and Claude Code, I downloaded the CLI app and fired it up. GitHub also has one, the Copilot CLI. I did circle back and use it after having used the Claude Code CLI for about 2 days, and I wasn't impressed with the Copilot CLI. If it was the first one I had used, I may have liked it more, but the output that I was getting from Claude after already working with it for 2 days was just too good to pass up. So I stuck with Claude whenever I went on this journey. And let's see if I can show what that looks like here. If I launch Claude just in my home directory in WSL here, it's going to pop up. It may ask me a few things. Yeah, sure, I'll trust the folder. Why not? And this is what you get, right? If you were in one of your project repos, you would want to run the /init to create a Claude MD file. There's all kinds of slash commands in here for different, whatever you're going to do. It's different agent stuff. But it's a crazy in-depth topic. The cool thing about these are, at least from my perspective, what kind of makes them game-changing is I just tell this thing what I want, right? And hand it the tools and the credentials that it's going to need, safely, of course, to do that job. And then it's going to try to do it. I think that's kind of what the commotion is about, not only with Claude Code, but some of the other tools like it, right? There's plenty of other ones out there. There's some open source ones that can connect to the open source models. These can connect to the open source models, I believe. But I've pretty much stuck with Claude Code direct integration. After, I want to say, about a week with the Pro plan, I started bumping into my limits a little bit and I had to upgrade because I really wanted to figure out what this thing can do. Let's see here. They've also got a nice start your first session guide here whenever you're wondering what can you ask it for, right? In this quick start guide, talks about how to download and install it, but it's just got some examples, start it, log in, and what are you going to do? What does this project do? It will inspect and attempt to explain it to you. What technologies does it use? It will attempt to summarize. But it can even get more in depth, right? You want to have it make a code change, add a hello world function, right? I would suggest going through some of this just to get some ideas, but if you do jump in the pool with Claude Code CLI, just start asking, but be safe. And we'll get into that a little bit. Let's see here. Yeah, so one of the first things that I had trouble with in this interface was um, it doesn't really show you your code, right? I can see the diffs flowing by as things are changed, but this isn't a code browser, as far as I can tell. I did open my IDE alongside it at first and start trying to track with, but it's moving so fast a lot of times that it just kind of gets in the way of the flow. So I stepped back and started reviewing the work when it was completed, right? Um, and once I realized kind of that was the jam, I started asking Claude Code what else it could do. And every time I would ask for something just a little on edge or what I thought was on the edge, it would do it. Within reason, it's not going to go change a tire or anything, but at least not yet. I can't hand it a lug wrench, but if I could, who knows? Uh, I'm still reaching for those limits, trying to find where they are, and I'm pretty amazed every time. So this interface is the one I think that if you haven't explored it yet and you are working with the models in your browser or in your IDE rather, um, take this next step and see what it looks like. So I'm going to wrap up part one here. I do hope you've enjoyed some of the backstory and some of the interface differences, chat versus IDE versus agentic or CLI interface that seem to be coming in. And do join me soon for part two, where we'll be diving into this actual slide deck and walking through the illustration of what went on through this craziness where I went from this first Claude Code CLI session and moved on into this wide multi-agent session thing. So I'll see y'all whenever I start that one up. Have a good one.